I will share my screen. Do you can see?
Yes.
Yes, everything is okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So, good morning. This presentation is called Designed to Disrupt because it challenges not only what is seen as innovative, but who is permitted to innovate. I am Raquel Lebre, Learning and Development Project Lead at IMPACTsci, a neurodivergent-led organization working across research, education, and inclusion. I speak not only from professional experience, but from lived experience that lends as shape this work. When people talk about inclusion in AI, they usually mean representation. They refer to more diverse datasets, better demographic sampling, or more voices on advisory boards. But this is not the same as structural inclusion. What if inclusions change not only the faces in the room, but the very shape of the room and the questions that are asked inside? This presentation invites you into a different way of seeing innovation. So it begins with lived experience as method, as evidence, as the basis of disrupting dominant narratives and in innovation. I am an autistic person with ADHD. What I share is not representative of every autistic person, but it is a grounded narrative through which to explore how innovation frameworks often ignore the bodies and minds they affect. Today is 18 June, Autistic Pride Day. It is a day not about awareness or acceptance, but about autonomy, community, and resistance to deficit narratives. Presenting this work on this date is not symbolic, it is structural because pride for autistic people means reclaiming the right to define ourselves and to lead the systems that transform the systems that shape our existence. Before moving on, let's define the concept of neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is natural variation in how human brains function, how we process, learn, communicate, and relate to the world. This is my story. I grew up in silence, not because I didn't know how to speak, but because language didn't always feel like mine. At 4, I began swimming lessons. Being in the water became one of my favorite places where my body and my sense made sense. At 8, I started studying music. A year later, I joined an orchestra. That's when I discovered something essential. Expression didn't need to be translated. It could emerge through pattern, through structure, through harmony. It was a language I recognized. These were my escape routes. These hobbies didn't need interaction with others. I was a reasonable student. I loved to read, but not school books. I preferred questions that weren't already answered. Socially, I was often on outside, not because I chose isolation, but because I didn't disrupt the expect. And if you don't disrupt, people assume you are fine. But silence is rarely neutral. High school felt unsafe. I suffered bullying and I did not have the language to explain what I was experiencing. I started observing human behavior, a lot to try and adapt to it. I achieved good academic results. Internally, I was masking all the time. The effort to appear regulate, social, and focused came at great personal cost. I had a normal university life, at least in the eyes of others, but I felt fragmented, exhausted, and emotionally displaced. In adulthood, I moved between various jobs: marketing, human research, operations assistant, and more. The roles varied, the pattern did not. I lacked professional stability. The price of fitting into normative system was too high. I performed as I expect, but behind that mask was chronic anxiety, burnout, executive dysfunction, and emotional fatigue. The performance of normality came at the cost of identity. Nothing felt meaningful. Everything changed when I received my autism diagnosis at 30, followed by ADHD a year later, bringing with it clarity, grief, validation, and empowerment. I realized I had never been broken. What was broken was the system that never accounted for natural variation of brain's function. Diagnosis was not the end point. It was the starting point of transformation. Advocacy became a form of survival and purpose. In 2020, I co-founded the Portuguese Autistic Voice Association, the first autistic-led self-advocacy association in Portugal. I began developing national and European projects to ensure that autistic people were not simply studied, but actively shaping inclusion frameworks. In 2023, PVA and IMPACTsci formed a partnership. In 2024, I joined the team. The work now bridges two vital practices: self-advocacy and system design. I fight for the rights of autistic people and also contribute to building inclusive structures through research, training, and applied practice. So, my disability didn't limit me, but structures around me did. Despite decades of inclusion in initiatives, fundamental barriers remain. Why inclusion still fails? In the UK, only 22% of autistic adults are in employment. Representation in research and innovation leadership is even rarer. Neurodivergent people consistently demonstrate strengths in systems thinking, pattern recognition, and novel problem solving. Yet most systems are designed in ways that exclude these capacities. This is not a pipeline issue. It is a structural design problem. Responsible research and innovation was developed to ensure innovation aligns with societal values. It advocates for ethical foresight, public engagement, and inclusive outcomes. However, in practice, responsible research and innovation remains largely top-down. It favors formalized process and abstract publics. It often fails to embed lived experience at the point of design. This absence is not accidental. When neurodivergent research led, different questions surface. Priorities change. Ethical risks are framed through sensory, cognitive, and communicative realities that dominant methods overlook. What counts as the problem often shifts. What that change everything downstream. This isn't just about inclusion, it's about transformation. Neurodivergent people often bring deep focus, pattern recognition skills, nonlinear thinking, among other key strengths. But traditional research structures rarely value or accommodate these strengths. That's why we must move from a deficit-based lens to a strength-based approach when talking about disabilities, including hidden disabilities. We ask different questions, and that reshapes the entire innovation process. Neurodivergent research is not simply more ethical or inclusive. It is methodologically distinct. It challenges what counts as rigor. It questions default modes of inquiry. Traditional research often uses consultation to validate a predetermined process. Neurodivergent-led research begins with co-creation. Traditional research frameworks rely on risk mitigation and compliance. Neurodivergent-led research prioritizes cognitive and sensory mapping and anticipates structural harm before it scales. This shift is not minor. It reorients the entire process of innovation. This kind of research does not just document difference. It interrogates power. It challenges assumptions long considered neutral. Methodological disruption occurs when the structure of research itself is reshaped, not only in its outcomes, but in its premises. In many projects, co-design is treated as a movement where marginalized groups are invited to provide feedback on an early finished idea. In a neurodivergent-led research, we shift design authority, placing lived experience at the center from the outset. It's not about asking for input. It's about asking different questions altogether. This also changed the ethical lens. Traditional ethics reviews look for surface-level risk, data privacy, informed consent, demographic bias. Neurodivergent researchers uncover risks that exist within cognition and interaction. For example, automation systems often carry high executive functioning demands. This might include forced task switching, time-limit interactions, or assumptions that user can process instructions linearly. For those who navigate cognition differently, these aren't neutral design choices. They are exclusion mechanisms. Finally, methodological disruption challenge the norms we take for granted. It integrates cognitive hierarchies in which certain ways of thinking are treated as more valid or efficient. It identifies a place assumptions baked into everything from user flows to success metrics. And it resists the idea that scalability must be the endpoint of all innovation. Sometimes systems should remain specific, relational, and local. Let's take a moment to see how IMPACTsci is a neurodivergent-led blueprint. At IMPACTsci, a social enterprise founded in 2022 with the mission of developing innovative, inclusive educational methodologies and tools specifically designed for neurodiverse learners, ensuring that their educational journeys are both effective and meaningful through customized, scientifically grounded approaches. Our work is powered by neuroscience, community collaboration, and lived experience. The goal is not only accessibility, but transformation. We don't just work on innovation, we change how it's defined. Three core principles define our work. First, scientific grounding through neuroscience and cognitive research. Second, leadership and authorship by neurodivergent experts. Third, alignment with European Union and global policy commitments, including the Pact for Skills and Global Disability Summit. Inclusion is not afterthought, it is a design foundation. IMPACTsci is engaged as partner or associate partners across several projects, such as Shift, Wellify, Charlie, Activate, and others, where we embed co-design methods, implement training systems, and prototype tools for neurodiverse communities. These are not pilot experience. They are operational blueprints for structural change. Internally, we practice what we advocate. Co-creation methods are accessible. Lived experience leads design. Internal operations reflect the values we promote externally. When people talk about inclusion in science or technology, they often refer to representation. More seats at the table, more diversity in panels, or in user testing. But that isn't inclusion in its full sense. Representation focuses on who is seen. Inclusion must ask, who gets to frame the question? Who defines the problem? Disruption is not dysfunction. It reveals fragility systems in systems that claim universality. Neurodivergent teams anticipate ethical misaligns early. They develop scalable designs that center the most marginalized. This makes innovation ecosystems more resilient, not less. Disruption creates better systems, not just different ones. If innovations is to serve everyone, it cannot continue to be built from the same old view. We do not want to sit at a table that was never made for us. We build new tables and show that they work. If responsible research and innovation is to be meaningful, neurodivergent-led organization must be involved from the beginning. I welcome questions.